It's a horse, not a person, but don't make this bigger than it is.
He got me out when my unit didn't, so don't tell me what he was.
You don't understand, that horse carried more than just a man. The fire started as a whisper at the edge of the barn, a thin ribbon of orange slipping through dry timber before anyone noticed, and by the time the wind caught it, the entire structure was breathing heat like a living thing. The night air, usually cool across the open acres of Thomas Hale's land, turned thick and sharp with the scent of burning hay and old wood, and somewhere inside that glow, a sound rose, high, strained, unmistakable, and Thomas stopped walking. At 78, his body moved slower than it used to, but his stillness now had nothing to do with age. It was the kind of stillness that came from recognition, from something deep and old tightening in his chest, the kind that didn't belong to a quiet farmer in rural Montana. He stood at the edge of the dirt path, boots planted, shoulders slightly hunched beneath a worn denim jacket, and watched as flames curled up the barn walls in long, deliberate fingers, each crack of timber echoing across the empty fields like distant thunder. The fence posts rattled in the rising heat, loose wire humming softly as if the land itself was trying to speak, but Thomas didn't move, not yet. His pale blue eyes reflected the firelight, steady, unblinking, taking it all in as if he had seen something like this before, because he had. The wind shifted, carrying sparks into the dark sky, and for a moment, the entire horizon flickered orange against black. A stark, unnatural sunrise in the middle of the night, and then it came. Again, that sound, from inside the barn, weaker this time, strained but present, and something inside Thomas broke its silence. His hand tightened slowly at his side, fingers curling as if remembering the weight of something long gone, something metal, something carried through years that never really left. "Ranger," he said, the name barely leaving his lips, almost swallowed by the crackle of fire, but it was enough. Enough to shift his weight forward one step, then another, boots grinding against gravel as heat pushed back against him like a wall. The air shimmered now, bending the shape of the barn, distorting everything into something unreal, and yet his focus never changed, locked on that single point where memory and reality collided. Behind him, the distant hum of an engine approached, tires rolling fast over dirt roads, laughter faintly carried on the wind before cutting off abruptly as the scene came into view. But Thomas didn't turn, didn't acknowledge them, didn't even seem to hear, because in that moment, the world had narrowed to fire and something inside it that mattered more than anything else left in his life. The flames surged higher, collapsing part of the roof with a heavy groan that sent sparks cascading outward like a storm of embers, and Thomas stopped again, closer now, close enough that the heat pressed into his chest, close enough that the past began to bleed through the present, not as a memory yet, not fully, but as a pressure building behind his eyes, waiting for something, some small detail, to break it open. And then he saw it, half hidden beneath falling ash near the entrance, a shape that didn't belong to the chaos, a piece of worn leather, darkened by soot, edges curled but still intact, lying where it had no reason to be. Except that it had been thrown, or dropped, or carried there in the last moments before everything changed, and as his gaze fixed on it, the noise of the fire seemed to fade, replaced by something older, something distant, something that hadn't been quiet in decades, and for the first time since the flames began, Thomas Hale took a breath that wasn't for the present, but for what was about to return. The leather lay just beyond the reach of the falling ash, its surface cracked and darkened but still holding its shape as if time itself had refused to take it, and Thomas stepped closer without thinking, each footfall slow, deliberate, measured against the heat pressing outward from the barn. The sounds behind him grew clearer now, car doors opening, hurried voices cutting through the night air, but they stayed distant, muffled by the weight building inside his chest, because none of that mattered, not yet. He lowered himself with a stiffness that came from years, not weakness, one knee bending as his hand reached toward the ground, fingers hovering just above the leather before finally making contact, and the moment his skin touched it, everything shifted. The fire did not disappear, but it moved aside, like a curtain pulled back just enough to let something else through, something older, something buried deep beneath decades of quiet. Mornings and long empty afternoons, the smell changed first, no longer just burned hay and timber, but something sharper, something metallic, mixed with heat and motion, and the air carried a different weight, heavier, tighter, charged with a tension that did not belong to a peaceful farm. Thomas's grip tightened slightly around the leather, recognizing its shape now, not as something from this place, but as something carried across miles and years. Something that had once been part of a different world entirely. Behind him, boots hit the dirt fast, uneven, followed by a voice trying to sound controlled and failing, a young man speaking too quickly, asking what had happened, but Thomas did not turn, did not answer, because the past had already begun to unfold in the edges of his vision. The barn's flames flickered, stretching higher, and in their movement he saw patterns that did not belong to fire alone. Shadows shifting in ways that felt familiar, as if the night itself was remembering alongside him. He turned the leather slightly in his hand, brushing away soot with his thumb, revealing a worn stitching line, a faint imprint pressed deep into the material, something that had been handled again and again until it became part of the object itself, and for a brief second, his breathing changed, slower, steadier, like a man aligning himself with something long practiced. The voices behind him grew closer now. More defined, one of them sharper, carrying authority, but still Thomas remained where he was, eyes fixed on that single piece of leather, because it was no longer just an object, it was a doorway, and he had already stepped through it whether he wanted to or not. The wind shifted again, pushing heat across his face, and with it came a sound layered beneath the crackling wood, something rhythmic, distant, not from the farm, not from this night, but from somewhere far beyond it. And Thomas's jaw tightened ever so slightly, a reaction so small it would have gone unnoticed by anyone watching, but it carried the weight of recognition. He rose slowly, the leather still in his hand, and for the first time since the fire began, he turned his head just enough to acknowledge the presence behind him, not with words, not with explanation, but with a look that did not match the man they thought they knew, because in that moment, Thomas Hale was no longer just the quiet farmer standing before a burning barn. He was something else entirely, something the night itself seemed to make room for, and the people arriving now, still catching their breath, still trying to understand what they were seeing, had no idea that they had just stepped into a story that had begun long before this fire ever touched the ground. The voices behind him settled into shape as Sheriff Robert Collins stepped forward, his boots crunching over gravel with the kind of confidence that came from years of being the final word in a small town, his wide brim hat casting a shadow over eyes that scanned the fire not with concern, but with calculation. Beside him, a younger figure lingered just behind the headlights of a pickup truck, half hidden but close enough for Thomas to recognize the outline, the posture, the restless shifting weight that did not belong to someone who had just arrived by accident. The sheriff spoke first, his tone measured, almost casual, as if this were nothing more than a routine call. "Looks like an old structure finally gave out, Thomas," he said, glancing briefly at the barn before returning his gaze to the man in front of him. "These things happen, especially with wood that dry," and there it was, the quiet dismissal, the careful framing of something deliberate into something inevitable. Thomas said nothing, the leather still resting in his hand, his thumb tracing along the worn seam again and again as if confirming it was real, as if anchoring himself to something that could not be rewritten by a sentence spoken too easily. The young man behind the truck shifted again, a faint laugh slipping out before it was quickly swallowed, but not quickly enough, and for the first time, Thomas's eyes moved fully toward him, steady and direct, cutting through the dim light until they landed on Derek Collins. Derek straightened slightly, caught in that gaze for a brief moment, and something in his expression flickered, not guilt, not yet, but uncertainty, the kind that came from being seen in a way he had not expected. Sheriff Collins followed the look, then stepped just enough to block the line between them, a subtle movement, practiced, protective, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a sharper edge. "My boy was with me all evening," he said, unprompted, the statement landing heavy in the air despite the absence of any accusation. "We came as soon as we saw the glow from the road, and the message was clear, spoken before it was needed, building a version of events before the truth had a chance to take shape." Thomas's grip tightened slightly around the leather, not in anger, but in recognition, because he had heard tones like this before. In different places, under different circumstances, where certainty was used as a shield and doubt was pushed aside before it could grow. The fire continued to burn behind them, quieter now as parts of the structure gave way, embers drifting into the night like fading signals, and for a moment, everything slowed, the sounds, the movement, even the wind seemed to hesitate, waiting for something to break the stillness. "There was a horse in there," Thomas said finally, his voice low, even, carrying none of the urgency that might have been expected, but something heavier, Something that did not ask to be believed, only stated. The sheriff exhaled through his nose, a short sound that might have been sympathy if it had lasted longer. "I am sorry to hear that," he replied, though his eyes had already moved away, scanning the edges of the property as if searching for something more useful than a conversation he did not intend to continue. "It was old, right?" he added, almost as an afterthought. "Animals do not last forever," and again, the quiet reduction. The attempt to shrink something significant into something ordinary. Thomas looked back toward the barn, the glow reflecting in his eyes once more, but this time it was different, not just the reflection of fire, but the reflection of something aligning beneath the surface, something steady and patient, the kind of understanding that did not need to argue to be certain, and when he spoke again, it was softer, almost to himself. "No," he said, he did not, and the words hung there, simple, unresolved, carrying a weight that none of them yet understood as the night continued to shift around them. The fire settled into a low, stubborn burn, its earlier roar fading into a steady crackle that filled the spaces between words, and the night began to cool again, but the air around Thomas Hale remained heavy, as if something unseen had taken hold and refused to let go. Sheriff Collins shifted his stance, adjusting his belt with a slow, practiced motion, his eyes no longer on the barn but on Thomas, studying him now with a different kind of attention, one that measured risk instead of damage. "We will file it as an accidental loss," he said, voice firm, already closing the case before it had begun. "I will have someone come by in the morning to take a look. But there is not much left to investigate here," and again, the tone carried finality, a quiet attempt to draw a line under something that had not yet been understood. Thomas did not respond, his gaze drifting past the sheriff, past the trucks, past the gathered figures, toward the open stretch of land beyond where the darkness lay untouched, and for a moment, it seemed like he was listening to something none of them could hear, something carried on the wind that moved through the tall grass in long, whispering waves. Derek shifted again near the truck, his earlier confidence thinning as the silence stretched longer than expected, his hands pushing into his jacket pockets, shoulders rising slightly as if to shield himself from a cold that had not yet reached anyone else, and when he glanced toward his father, there was a question there, small but present, a flicker of doubt that had not been there before. "We are done here," the sheriff added, sharper now, the authority in his voice tightening as if to force movement back into a scene that refused to obey him. "Everyone can head home," and one by one, the few onlookers began to step back, engines starting, headlights turning, the night slowly reclaiming its quiet edges, but Thomas did not move, and that stillness drew attention again, subtle at first, then undeniable, because there was something in it that did not match the moment, something that did not align with loss or confusion or even anger, but something steadier, something resolved. He turned the leather over once more in his hand, brushing away the last of the ash, and this time, the marking beneath the soot became clearer, not fully visible, but enough for him to see what it had always been, what it had always meant, and his fingers paused there, resting on that spot as if acknowledging it. "That horse," he said again, quieter now, not to argue, not to explain, but to place the words where they belonged. "He carried me when nothing else could," and the sentence did not land like a complaint or a defense, it landed like a fact, one that did not ask for agreement. Sheriff Collins exhaled slowly, a hint of impatience breaking through the composed exterior. "It was just an animal, Thomas," he replied, the words sharper than before, the dismissal more direct, and for a brief second, the air tightened. Again, not from heat this time, but from the weight of something unseen pressing between them. Thomas looked at him then, fully, directly, and whatever the sheriff expected to find in that gaze, it was not there, because there was no anger, no pleading, no need for validation, only a quiet certainty that did not bend under pressure. The wind moved again, carrying the last embers upward into the dark sky, and as they drifted, fading one by one, something shifted beneath the surface of the night. Something subtle but undeniable, like the moment before a distant sound becomes clear, and though no one spoke it, though no one named it, the balance had already begun to change, and the man they had believed they understood was no longer standing where they thought he was. The last of the vehicles pulled away slowly, their headlights shrinking into thin lines before disappearing beyond the curve of the road, and with them went the noise, the movement, the illusion that this was just another night that would be forgotten by morning, leaving only the quiet behind. Sheriff Collins lingered a moment longer than the others, standing near his truck with one hand resting on the door. watching Thomas in a way that was no longer casual, no longer dismissive, but measuring, calculating, as if something about the old man's stillness had unsettled a balance he did not fully understand, and when he finally spoke again, his voice had lost some of its earlier ease. "You should get some rest," he said, not as advice, but as closure, as if ending the conversation would end whatever tension had begun to form. Thomas did not answer, and after a brief pause, the sheriff nodded once to himself, climbed into the truck, and drove off, leaving behind only the fading echo of tires against gravel and the soft whisper of wind moving through open land. Silence returned fully then, thick and complete, wrapping itself around the remains of the barn and the lone figure standing before it, and for a long moment, Thomas Hale did nothing, his posture unchanged, his gaze steady on the blackened frame that still held its shape against the night sky like a memory refusing to collapse. Then, slowly, he turned away. The house stood a short distance up the path, its porch light casting a steady yellow glow across the worn steps and wooden railing, unchanged, untouched, a quiet contrast to what had just been lost, and Thomas walked toward it without hesitation, each step even, unhurried, as if he had already decided what came next long before this night began. The door creaked softly as he pushed it open, the familiar scent of old wood and dust greeting him, layered with something else, something faint but present, like a place that had held on to its past carefully, deliberately, refusing to let it fade. Inside, everything was in its place, the same as it had been for years: boots by the door, a chair worn smooth at the arms, a small table with a single lamp casting a soft circle of light, and beyond that, against the far wall, a cabinet, plain, unremarkable, its surface marked by time but kept clean with quiet discipline. Thomas stepped toward it, the leather still in his hand, and for the first time since the fire began, his movement carried purpose beyond observation, beyond reaction. It carried intent. He set the leather gently on the table, his fingers lingering on it for just a second before pulling away, and then he reached into his jacket pocket, retrieving a small key, worn smooth at the edges from years of use but rarely seen, rarely needed. The lock clicked softly as he turned it, the sound precise, controlled, and when the cabinet door opened, it did so without resistance, as if it had been waiting. Inside, the darkness held shapes that were not immediately clear, but Thomas did not hesitate, his hand moving past the front, deeper, until it found what it was looking for, and when he brought it into the light, the room seemed to shift again, not with noise or motion, but with presence. Metal caught the glow of the lamp, edges defined, surfaces worn but maintained, each piece carrying a weight that had nothing to do with size, and for a moment, Thomas simply looked at it, not with pride, not with regret, but with recognition, as if acknowledging something that had always been there, waiting, unchanged. Outside, the wind moved again, brushing against the walls of the house, carrying the faint scent of ash through the open fields, but inside, the air remained still, held in place by the quiet unfolding of something that had been set aside for a very long time. And as Thomas Hale stood there, the man who had been seen as nothing more than a quiet farmer began, without a word, to return to something the world had long since forgotten. Thomas held the metal in his hands as if measuring its weight against something unseen, the faint glow of the lamp tracing the edges of each piece, revealing scratches, worn corners, and the quiet history pressed into their surfaces, and for a long moment, he did not move, not because he hesitated, but because he understood exactly what this meant. Outside, the wind carried the last traces of smoke across the fields, brushing against the house in slow, steady waves, but inside, the air remained still, contained, as if the room itself recognized the shift taking place. He set one of the metals carefully on the table, then another, aligning them with a precision that came not from habit alone, but from memory, from years when every detail mattered, when small things carried consequences far beyond themselves. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, each action connected to the next with quiet purpose, and when he finally reached for the folded fabric beneath them, he paused, his fingers resting lightly against it, as if acknowledging the time that had passed since it had last been worn. The fabric was dark, heavier than it looked, its surface holding the faint scent of storage and something older beneath it, something that did not fade with years, and when he lifted it, the room seemed to settle even further, as if everything unnecessary had fallen away. Thomas unfolded it slowly, the motion steady, controlled, revealing the lines, the structure, the insignia that caught the light just enough to define themselves without needing to be announced, and for a brief second, the man standing in that quiet room was no longer just a farmer. Returning from loss, he was something else entirely, something that had never truly left, only waited. He placed the jacket over the back of the chair, smoothing it once with his hand, then stepped back, his eyes scanning it not with pride, but with assessment, as if preparing for something rather than remembering it. The leather from the barn still lay on the table beside the metals, its darkened surface contrasting against the clean lines of the metal, and Thomas reached for it again, lifting it just enough to turn it toward the light, and now the mark was clearer, a faint imprint that matched something deeper in the room, something not yet visible but already understood. His jaw set slightly, not in anger, but in decision, and when he spoke, it was not directed at anyone present, because there was no one else there. It was spoken into the space itself, into the silence that had carried him this far. "They will not understand," he said, voice low, even, carrying no doubt, only certainty, and then, after a brief pause, "But they will listen," and the words did not rise, did not demand attention, they settled, firm and grounded, like something that had already been decided long before it was spoken. Outside, far down the road, the faint glow of taillights had long since disappeared, the town returning to its routine, unaware of what had been set into motion, unaware that the quiet man they had passed without a second thought had just stepped beyond that role. And as Thomas Hale reached for the jacket once more, lifting it with the same care he had given the metals, the distance between who he was and who he had been began to close, not with force, not with noise, but with the quiet inevitability of something returning exactly when it was meant to. Morning came without ceremony, a pale gray light stretching across the open land as if unsure it belonged there, and the farm stood quiet beneath it, the remains of the barn now reduced to darkened beams and low smoke that drifted lazily into the cold air. Thomas Hale stepped out onto the porch already dressed, the jacket resting on his shoulders with a natural weight, not stiff, not foreign, but familiar in a way that did not need adjustment, and the metals, placed with precision, caught just enough of the early light to define their presence without drawing attention. He paused at the top step, not to look back, but to take in the silence, the kind that follows something final, and for a brief moment, the wind moved through the grass again, softer now, carrying no ash, no heat, just the open stillness of land that had witnessed everything and said nothing. Down the road, the town was already waking, engines starting, doors opening, routines unfolding in the same patterns they had followed for years, unaware that something had shifted just beyond their reach, something that would not stay quiet much longer. Thomas walked to his truck, an older model, clean but worn, its engine turning over with a steady hum that matched the rhythm of his movement, and as he pulled onto the road, gravel giving way beneath the tires, there was no hesitation in his direction, no uncertainty in where he was going. The sheriff's station sat at the edge of town, a simple building with a flag out front and a parking lot that never quite filled, and this morning was no different. A few vehicles scattered across the space, the door already open, voices faintly carrying from inside. When Thomas stepped out, the sound of his boots on pavement drew a glance from a deputy near the entrance, a young man, mid-20s, posture straight but not yet settled into authority, and his eyes lingered for just a second longer than expected, taking in the jacket, the metals, the way Thomas carried himself, something about it not fitting the image he had known, something that did not match the quiet farmer he had seen in passing before. "Can I help you, sir?" the deputy asked, the word "sir" coming naturally, not forced, and Thomas nodded once, his gaze steady. "I am here to file a report," he said, voice even, carrying the same quiet weight it had held the night before. Inside, Sheriff Collins stood behind his desk, a cup of coffee in hand, his posture relaxed in the way of someone who believed the day ahead was already under control, and when he looked up, the shift in his expression was immediate, subtle but unmistakable, because the man standing in his doorway was not the same one he had left on the roadside hours earlier. The room grew quieter without anyone speaking, the small movements slowing, conversations trailing off, and for a brief second, even the hum of the building seemed to settle. Thomas stepped forward, measured, composed, stopping just short of the desk, and placed the piece of leather gently beside the sheriff's coffee, not with force, not with accusation, but with certainty, and as his hand withdrew, he met the sheriff's eyes fully, without hesitation, without doubt, and said, "This was not an accident," and the words did not rise Did not challenge, they landed, firm and unmovable, like something that had already been decided, and for the first time since the fire began, the balance in the room shifted in a way no one could ignore. The words settled into the room with a weight that did not need to be raised to be felt, and for a brief moment, no one moved, not the deputy by the door, not the clerk at the back desk, not even Sheriff Collins, whose hand remained loosely wrapped around his coffee cup as if he had forgotten it was there. The leather on the desk drew his attention first, his eyes dropping to it, scanning its worn surface. The edges darkened from the night before, and something in his expression tightened. Just slightly, before he looked back up at Thomas, attempting to reclaim the control that had come so easily hours ago. "You are making a serious claim," he said, his tone measured, but no longer dismissive. "You got any proof to go with that?" And the question hung there, familiar, practiced, a challenge designed to shift the burden back where he wanted it. Thomas did not respond immediately, and that silence stretched again. But this time it carried something different, something that filled the space instead of leaving it empty, and then, without breaking eye contact, he reached into his jacket, not rushed, not dramatic, just deliberate, and placed a small, worn identification case on the desk beside the leather. The deputy near the door leaned forward slightly, curiosity pulling him closer despite himself, and Sheriff Collins hesitated for a fraction of a second before opening it, his fingers slower now, less certain, and when he saw what was inside, the change was immediate. Subtle to anyone who did not know what to look for, but unmistakable to those who did. The room shifted again, not with sound, but with awareness, as if something had just been revealed that could not be unseen. "Captain," the deputy said quietly from the doorway, the word slipping out before he could stop it, his eyes fixed on the identification, then on the medals, then back to Thomas, piecing together something that had not been visible before. Sheriff Collins closed the case slowly, placing it back on the desk with more care than he had shown anything else that morning. And for the first time, his posture changed, not dramatically, not enough to admit anything outright, but enough to signal that the ground beneath him was no longer as stable as it had been. "Even so," he began, his voice tighter now, "searching for footing, that does not change what happened out there." But the sentence did not carry the same weight it had before, and he seemed to know it. From the back of the room, the clerk had already picked up a phone, her movements quiet but purposeful, dialing a number not listed on any public directory, her eyes flicking once toward Thomas before focusing on the task, and when the call connected, her voice dropped lower, professional, controlled. "Yes, I need to verify a record," she said, each word precise, careful, and the name that followed carried across the room just enough to be heard. "Thomas Hale." The silence deepened again, but this time it was not empty, it was expectant, charged with something building just beneath the surface, and outside, a vehicle passed on the road. Its sound briefly filling the gap before fading away, leaving the station wrapped in a stillness that no one could break. Thomas remained where he stood, hands relaxed at his sides, his expression unchanged, not watching the clerk, not watching the deputy, only watching the sheriff, steady, unwavering, as if the outcome of this moment had never been in question. And somewhere on the other end of that call, far from the small town that had tried to close the story before it began, a response was forming, one that would not be shaped by convenience or familiarity, but by something far older, far more rigid, something that did not bend. And as the seconds passed, stretching longer than anyone in the room expected, it became clear that whatever came next would not belong to Sheriff Collins anymore. The voice on the other end of the line did not hesitate, and even though no one in the room could hear the words clearly, they could feel the shift the moment the clerk straightened, her posture changing from routine to precise, from local to formal, and when she spoke again, her tone carried a different weight. "Yes, sir, understood," and that single phrase traveled across the room like a quiet signal, something official, something final. She lowered the phone slowly, placing it back into its cradle with care, then turned toward Sheriff Collins, her expression composed but no longer neutral. "They are sending someone," she said, each word measured. "They ask that everything remain as it is," and the room held that sentence in silence, letting it settle into place. Sheriff Collins did not respond immediately, his eyes moving from the clerk to the identification on his desk, then to the medals, and finally back to Thomas. And for the first time since the night before, there was no attempt to dismiss, no effort to control the direction of what was happening, only a pause, long enough to reveal that something had shifted beyond his reach. Outside, the low hum of an approaching vehicle broke the stillness, not fast, not urgent, but deliberate, steady, and when it came into view through the front window, it was not marked like the local cars, its presence unfamiliar in a way that drew attention without needing to announce itself. The engine cut, the door opened, and a man stepped out, his posture straight, movements controlled, the kind of presence that did not rely on volume or gesture to be understood, and as he entered the station, the air seemed to tighten just slightly, not from tension, but from recognition. "Captain Hale," he said, his voice firm, respectful, and without hesitation, and the use of the title carried more than acknowledgement, it carried weight, history, and something that did not belong to this small room but now filled it completely. Thomas inclined his head once. Not in surprise, not in gratitude, but in quiet recognition, and the two men held that moment without needing to say more. The official turned then, his attention shifting to Sheriff Collins, and though his tone remained even, it carried a clarity that left no space for interpretation. "We will be taking over this matter," he said, not as a request, not as a suggestion, but as a fact, one that had already been decided. The sheriff nodded once, slowly, the movement controlled, but the change was unmistakable. The authority that had defined him in this space now reduced to something smaller, something that no longer set the terms. The deputy near the door straightened instinctively, his earlier uncertainty replaced by something closer to understanding. As if a piece of a larger picture had finally come into focus. Outside, the town continued its morning, unaware, unchanged, but inside the station, the balance had shifted completely, and as the official gathered the documents, the leather, the pieces that told a story far beyond what anyone had first assumed, Thomas stepped back slightly, not withdrawing, but allowing the process to unfold as it was meant to. He did not look at the sheriff again, did not seek acknowledgement, did not wait for anything more, because he did not need to. The truth had already moved forward, steady and irreversible, and as he turned toward the door, the light from outside catching briefly on the metals at his chest, there was no triumph in his expression, no satisfaction, only the same quiet stillness he had carried from the beginning, the same presence that had never needed to prove itself. He stepped out into the open air, the wind moving gently across the street, carrying the ordinary sounds of a town that would remember this day long after it passed, and as he walked back toward his truck, the distance between who he had been and who he was no longer existed, because it had never truly been there at all. Some things are not lost with time, they are simply waiting for the moment they are needed again.